One of the most defining moments for the world's second largest cryptocurrency by market cap, Ethereum, will be the years-long process culminating in September when ETH developers pulled off a massive upgrade to its protocol known as the merge. It was no small task for the hundreds of developers and client teams to build, coordinate, and successfully swap out Ethereum's core from proof of work to proof of stake. That's why Vitalik Buterin and Ethereum developers are among CoinDesk's most influential 2022. Earlier this week, I spoke with Ethereum Foundation Protocol support lead Tim Beiko about how Ethereum is weathering crypto winter in the wake of FTX's fallout. Take a listen.
I think from Ethereum's perspective, and especially at the protocol level, what happens, all of the craziness that happens in the crypto space, whether this is in DeFi or, on centralized exchanges, doesn't really change how we go about, working towards making Ethereum better. So the merge was the big thing we worked on this past year, and now ever since that was live on the network, people have been focused on all of the future upgrades we're going to bring to Ethereum. But the volatility of the space doesn't really change kind of how quickly things happen. Everyone is still kind of heads down working on improving things.
All right, so how has Ethereum developed since the merge? What data can you share in terms of growth and health of the network, such as how many validators have grown, et cetera?
Yeah, so at a high level, what we were hoping to see at the merge was ideally nothing, right? Like, we wanted the transition to be as smooth as possible for users and for their whole network, and that's kind of how we would know that it was a success. And the main metric that we use to track the health of the proof of stake chain is what we call the participation rate. And this is really kind of the core metric that tells us, are people online doing their job? And so when the merge happened, we saw basically the network go from 99 point something %, which is what we usually get, down to about 95, so a tiny blip for a few hours. And then ever since then, it's been pretty steady around 99. So this tells us, the transition was successful. People are still kind of validating on the network. They're not having issues doing that, and that's really the most important thing. The other thing that's been really nice to see after the merge is the stability in terms of block times on the network. So before the merge, when we used proof of work, we would always target about 13 seconds for blocks. But because proof of work is this random process, you only get an average of 13 seconds, and you get a pretty big distribution. And now after the merge, we get these blocks every 12 seconds, except if someone is offline. And like I was just saying, this happens less than 1% of the time. So this means that for Ethereum users and developers, the network kind of creates new blocks in a much more stable way, and that's been shown in just a better kind of market for gas prices, where because we know that blocks are always coming, transactions get included at a regular pace. So yeah, we've just had
How is that market for gas overall. Prices these days?
It's pretty good relative to last year. So I haven't checked it today, but transaction fees have been relatively low just because usage has gone down in the past few months. A big focus of all of the protocol teams right now is helping to reduce the cost on layer 2s as well. So layer 2s, things like Starkware, Optimism, Arbitrum, they're already live. They already have products today that are cheaper than the Ethereum mainnet. But we really want to spend a lot of time and effort to make them even cheaper. So, in 2023, one big thing you'll be hearing about is just how, we can reduce the cost on layer 2s by another 10x or more to make sure that we can onboard way more users and enable use cases where high transaction costs just don't work.
So Ethereum developers have decided to consider 8 Ethereum improvement proposals, EIPs, for inclusion in the network's upcoming hard fork, which is called Shanghai. What are the most important of these proposals in your view, and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's worth noting there's kind of 2 different statuses for improvement proposals. One is considered for inclusion, which means, we're not quite sure we're going to do it. And then, when we officially include something, we just say it's included. So the most important thing that we wanted to do after the merge was enabling beacon chain withdrawals. And this is basically the only big thing that's already being included. And I think it's pretty obvious why we want to do it. So we did not do it at the merge just because of the complexity. The merge was already a pretty big upgrade for Ethereum, and we didn't want to add any kind of risks of bugs or whatnot happening. So we didn't include the ability for validators to withdraw. But now, obviously, validators have been doing this for a very long time, some for over 2 years. And so it's a good thing to enable them to withdraw their capital. And even if people want to remain validators, say you might have staked in a centralized exchange and now you want to run your own validator, or you want to use a staking pool. So giving people the ability to kind of not only get their stake back, but also potentially move it to a different provider. That's the #1 priority for everyone.
Well, certainly. It's causing a lot of anxiety in the community, I think. So let's talk about that ETH tied up on the network. When will stakers be able to access their tokens? Can you give a timeline?
So short answer is no. And the reason for why we don't have a direct timeline is just because there's other things we are considering for the upgrade in parallel, like upgrades to the EVM, upgrades to scaling. We still don't yet know what's the full scope. We're going to do withdrawals, but there might be 2 or 3 things that come alongside it. And I think we're going to need to figure that out to have an exact timeline. That said, I don't think anybody would want to significantly delay withdrawals over any other feature. So if there's something that would add months to the time for withdrawals to happen, I don't think it'll be coupled together. And the hope is that in the next week or 2 we can basically finalize this list for Shanghai so that we're able to provide a clearer timeline. But if you want a very high level one, of course in the first half of next year it will happen. Yeah.
That's a pretty good ballpark figure. So how is the network addressing censorship issues like Tornado Cash?
So, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And I think this is where withdrawals is actually quite helpful. So the reason why these censorship issues are a bit more problematic now than they were at proof of work has to do with how MEV is handled on Ethereum. So in proof of work, the way we would do MEV was very trust-based. So because there's only a few big mining pools in proof of work, the MEV providers, so teams like Flashbots, can go to every one of them and basically have agreements with them where they're going to send user transactions, trust the mining pools to not exploit that information, and that's basically how the network works. And with the merge and the transition to proof of stake, we have way more validators on the network, and we wanted to ensure that any validator, can participate and extract MEV, regardless of whether they're connected to Flashbots or not. You don't need an agreement with Flashbots. But the downside to doing that is that before in proof of work, when MEV bundles were sent in, miners could always add extra transactions at the end. Whereas in proof of stake, we need to give a whole block to validators for technical reasons because we want to make sure that we don't have to trust. There's less trust involved. Mm-hmm. And this means that if a lot of the marketplaces where this exchange between people building blocks and validator happens, add censorship requirements, that's something that is outside of the protocol but can still affect the blocks that get built. And when people talk about censoring relays, this is what they mean. They mean that there's this infrastructure that sits between people building blocks and validators that mediates kind of the auction for what's the best block to be sent to a validator. And that kind of marketplace can add extra censorship conditions, that we don't see on our protocol. And there's been a lot of pushback by that in the community. And I think that's, it's great that the Ethereum community kind of came together and highlighted that this was not something that they wanted to support. And we're starting to see more and more alternatives, basically where there's not just one marketplace where builders and validators exchange blocks. Anyone can create one. And so there's more and more of these alternatives that are coming with just different requirements on what they think should be censored or not. And hopefully by having a diverse set of those, we can limit the impact of censorship on the network in the short term.
And to that end, we have to wrap up. But I do just want to ask one last question on, your overall outlook on Ethereum, and especially with respect to concerns on the regulatory front, because now there seems to be some dithering between the SEC, the CFTC regulators in determining whether or not Ether is a security.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't have an informed view on that. I think when we think about designing the protocol, we think first and foremost about like technical soundness and security, and also like Ethereum being used across the world, right? Like obviously the US is a big place and it's important, but it's also not the entirety of the world. So I think from the perspective of all the people working on the protocol, it's not the main thing people spend their time thinking about. They spend their time thinking about how do you build the secure, scalable, and just like safe platform for people to use, and how do we get it used by as many people around the world as possible. Fortunately, yeah, I don't have much more.
And okay, then Tim, your most immediate versus long-term outlook on the potential for Ethereum that is most important.
So the most important thing in the short term, I think, is withdrawals. So like we were just saying, it's really important for people to be able to get their stake back and to be able to kind of make decisions about where to allocate it. I think the biggest thing long term is just, can we build this and can we build new experiments and things on Ethereum that we can't do anywhere else in the world, that you can't, build in the real world because institutions won't let you, or there's just not the infrastructure to do so. So this is why, I do what I do. Is we've already seen tons of these. We've seen DeFi, we've seen NFTs, we've seen things like ENS, we've seen quadratic funding on Gitcoin. My hope is just we can build like 1,000 of those things that were just not possible anywhere before, and have the smartest people in the world come and decide to build them on Ethereum.
That was Ethereum Foundation Protocol Support Lead Tim Beiko.